credit reference and with regard to identification and linking with credit reference. And then we have Bruce Hanson. He's the President and CEO of Credence ID, and he'll be talking to us about ubiquitous identity confirmation as a key enabler. And my name is Barry Cooper. I'm from the Center for Financial Regulation and Inclusion. We work across the developing world with regard to financial inclusion matters, and particularly I look at payments and integrity, and part of integrity is identity. Okay, so let me kick off with, if the slides will just... Okay, so what is financial inclusion? So the moment you ask a banker about financial inclusion, and I know because I used to be a banker, the eyes roll back and people just really give you a funny look. It's not something that they really want to engage with. But actually, if you look at what financial inclusion really is, it's banks taking good care of their existing customers and their underserved customers. So a lot of the financial inclusion happens even at the middle class level, where people don't have access to financial products. Sorry, this is just, I'll have to step out here because this has gone off. So a key element of a key definition is one that comes from the World Bank. It's quite succinct and summarized, but there's a lot of power in the words that they've put together. So I'll read it for you. It's a state in which individuals and businesses have access to useful and affordable, so it's useful and affordable financial products and services that meet their needs. So useful, meet their needs in the form of transactions, payment, savings, credit, and insurance, delivered in a responsible and sustainable way. So the two elements that I would like to link there is both useful, affordable, meeting their needs. That's a consumer-centric view. It says that this has to add value to the consumer, and then delivered in a sustainable way. So that sustainability does not mean that it is a donor-funded way. It means it has to wash its own face. It has to be sustainable in the longer term. So those are key elements that are in financial inclusion. Typically, in years gone by, financial inclusion was about counting bank accounts, because we were asked, what is financial inclusion? It's about access. You notice the word access is quite prominent. But actually, what we found out is that counting bank accounts was no use, because you would just roll out an enormous amount of bank accounts, and if you have a look at the utilization of it, it was very, very low. So people would be forced to use a bank account. They get their salary in the bank account, and what they do, they just draw it all out. And so that mailbox bank account just indicates that people are not getting benefit from the service. They're forced into it, and it's not sustainable. So then the definition of financial inclusion therefore pivots on utilization. And what we say is that you need to have welfare, and it needs to be a welfare enhancing activity. It needs to link to economy, to grow an economy, and also to benefit from the growth in an economy. So it's people linking into the broader economy in a very formalized way. And not necessarily formalized. There can be various levels of formality. So it pivots on the concept of utilization. If you utilize those products effectively, you get the benefit of the financial product. You get the benefit of managing your financial lives, becoming more resilient to risk, being able to afford things with savings products, appropriate credit products where you can employ it in a productive way. So that's what financial inclusion is, and we have different frontiers of financial inclusion. Is financial inclusion for everybody? And the answer is sadly not, because financial inclusion frontiers are limited by the efficiency of the financial service providers. Where can they provide this in a sustainable way? So what we say is that there's one frontier that's very easy. It's probably the middle class. How easy is it to take that next step? And that depends on the efficiency of the banking system or the financial services system, and the appropriateness of that. Is it appropriate that everybody has a bank account? if you're earning $1 or $2 a day, but there are other services like village savings and loan services that can meet that need. And similarly, with the rollout of identity, we also need to understand this phased approach, or these frontiers, and how to roll it out best. Because financial inclusion works best when it scales up. It has one model that targets a very, very solid audience, and thereafter utilizes that scale to incrementally increase the footprint. Sorry, the projectors are. I can't see anything on the projector. Okay, so I'm working blind here. But one aspect of financial inclusion, identity, is very crucial. And why is it crucial? It's because of FATF recommendation 10. It means that you have to be able to identify your customer in order to transact. And what that means has opened up various interpretations. These are the figures from last Thursday. They were released from Findex. It's the latest Findex. And it's around 30% of people that are financially excluded. They report that they don't have access to identity. So that is probably a third of people that are cut out of the financial system. It's because of identity. So that makes identity a very, very strong driver of financial inclusion. So we've been doing research in sub-Saharan Africa with regard to financial inclusion, and in line with Financial Sector Deepening Africa, which is a DFID institution. And what we've come up with is that there are multiple biometric systems, and particularly in countries, up to 10 in one country. So you can be sitting on 10 different biometric platforms, all single use case platforms. So the single use case, you don't start a business with just one small product, because that business becomes very shaky. And these become very, very expensive business cases to implement. So single use case businesses, it's very, very specialized identity systems, and so they're not really that geared to open architecture or privacy. Privacy by design is not part of their makeup. So that creates inefficiencies, because you get multiple people registered multiple times. And also, it goes across from voters registration, government programs, and donor programs. Probably one of the worst offenders is donor programs that keep on coming in with a brand new biometric identified for a specific target market. And they don't see what the collective impact is with all these different identity systems in the same market at the same time. And what the potential is to leverage off that. So identity information is registered in one system, and it's not available to the others. Now that's a crucial piece, because you can only service your client base that you registered, and only with the information. You don't have access to the other wealth of information that is sitting on the other biometric systems or the other identity systems. That's a big waste. It's a massive waste of potential. And what we see is there's just the lack of interoperability. There's multiple standards. There's a lot of proprietary standards. So some international standards are becoming more prominent, but they're all over the show. There's various qualities of system. So it's quite a mishmash. There's a lot of uncoordinated activity. So that's what we're finding. And what is the result? So for consumers, you're having to now, instead of being able to utilize one biometric or one data element to prove your identity and link to all your other data elements, instead of doing that, you now have to go and drag a whole lot of paper from one to the next, and you don't have any ability of being interoperable. What we say is that a good, solid identity system or biometric system should make the consumer interoperable with the financial system, and not the other way around. So we want to make the consumer interoperable. We don't want the consumer to become it's a big hassle factor, and that when it is uptake, you find it's for very few or very niche products, and that's very, very limiting. So it's very shallow use of services. And with financial inclusion, we want deeper utilization. You're not getting deeper utilization with that. It erodes consumer trust. What you're offering is like you're offering a step forward, and actually you're offering disappointment because they can't do a lot with it. They have to register over and over. And it limits the interoperability of individuals in financial systems. Businesses, obviously, it's hugely inefficient. It increases the cost of identity systems, particularly if you have to balance your whole business case on one or two use cases. It's very, very risky. It's higher risk. And weakens your negotiating position because you're not going after enormous scale. You can't negotiate for your negotiation position is limited. And often we find that governments and institutions are locked into contracts. And that's a big problem we've encountered with many interviews of locking in governments, locking in institutions into vendor contracts. But there are ways of getting around it, and I think a lot of vendors themselves are open to cooperation. And it reduces the ability of institutions to meet the customers' needs because the cost of these systems is so high that it takes up just too much resources. You can't do a whole lot of other things through that. So what we've come up with is nothing new. It's something that many people are coming up with in this forum. You have all these disparate identity systems at the bottom. We look at ways of assessing original biometric data in a source code, or accessing or interoperating between the different pieces of data. Standardization templates will ultimately have a resource, an identity resource, where you can take advantage of the richness of the data stored on many different systems, where you can provide value-added services. And we also need to say, what is the competitive space versus what's the non-competitive space? Is it good to be able to compete on the number of people you signed up, or is it better to compete on the value you can add or the utilization you can create out of that? Okay, and some of the key barriers that we've encountered, competition between government departments. So in many countries you find there's two different identity systems or bases between government departments. And you might think that, that's a bit odd. Why is one government issuing many different kinds of identity processes or systems? And what you find is that there's often a very good reason for this, and there's a clash of mandates. There's a legal reason for this, and that's because these mandates haven't been harmonized. And so you find that they have got no option but to issue a separate identity system. And often there's competition between departments of. So that's a big issue we've seen. And then the one I've alluded to before, it's the uncoordinated donor programs. They seem to seed a lot of biometrics programs, and we can capitalize on them, but there just needs to be a little bit more coordination between donors and donor agencies, and transparency of what they want to achieve. What you've also seen is that the high cost is because of most of these systems are based on a single use case. And that is, I've gone over that in terms of the cost effectiveness, the risk of those kinds of systems. The sustainability is another one. Where we see public-private partnerships are key. And then just in the nature of work in Africa, inevitably you're going to use more than one biometric type. And that's a big issue because it can be a little bit more costly. And then Another big barrier is the infrastructure constraints. it's not only ITC infrastructure, it's roads, it's getting to people. That is a big constraint, and that's where maybe the frontier approach can serve countries well, where you target the higher density areas first to gain scale, and then thereafter look at the lower density areas. It's not an easy one to sell to the public, but that's in terms of economics is the best way to roll it out. Insufficient local capacity. Now, when you've got, like, say, 10 biometric systems or 10 identity systems running in a country, each one of those systems are competing with each other for the available capacity. So you're fighting each other. There's probably enough intellectual capacity and trained people in that region or in that jurisdiction to run one system, but we are now fighting against each other for the available capacity, and then backfilling with additional capacity from that is imported. That is a big problem, and that problem can be solved either within a jurisdiction or even regionally. If you start making these systems more regional, that problem becomes less and less, because you can capitalize on the skills in a vast skill pool. But that's one of the key barriers to beginning or running an effective program. Inadequate regulatory. That's one of my games. Is the regulatory frameworks. Now, often biometric data doesn't have any foundation in law. You can't use it as a means of identity. What we're looking at is in terms of FATF regulation, FATF 10, to be able to utilize a strong identifier like a biometric in order to do away with the use of any paper whatsoever. And that is quite in line with FATF 10. So proof of address, all those kinds of, all the paper that you need to drag to the bank, that the bank needs to store for I don't know how many years. Potentially, you can get away with getting rid of all the paper whatsoever if you've got a strong identifier, and that's exactly in line with what FATF, the FATF recommendations are. Nowhere in FATF does it say that you need to have a proof of address. Nowhere does it say you need to store bits of paper for years and years and years. We've interpreted that because of the 1970 Banking Secrecy Act in the United States, and that has flown over and it's become part of the landscape. But it's not necessary. It's compliance for compliance sake. So that's one of the areas we're looking at. But also to be able to verification as a signature, to be able to have valid force of digital acts in the world, in the physical world. That's like that will be like the electronic communications and transactions. There's a lot of regulation that needs to be able that enables a proper functioning identity system. And what we've seen here is that many even the bigger ones, they've gone and pulled the trigger and gone ahead without doing a lot of the regulatory work. And what happens is that you have high court cases and a lot of litigation afterwards. And what that does is brings the entire system into disrepute. It lessens the trust in the system, and that is a very important aspect to avoid. So those are some of the main barriers. There are many more. And what we came up with is a roadmap based on the pitfalls that some of the very competent players have encountered in their roadmap to implementation. What we see in the first column is just enablers, as I alluded to, is the regulatory frameworks, having the business case up front, and particularly design elements like privacy by design, designing integrity into the system, and then the capacity development upfront, knowing that if you pull the trigger on an